Thank you, Secretary Sparrow. Thank you, Gurney, for the invitation to this job. And my thanks to everyone who has come today to this wonderful celebration of writers. To Governor Beshear for this appointment, to the Kentucky Arts Council for its role in organizing today's festivities and for supporting the arts in all the ways that you do, to family and friends who have made time in your day for me. I am honored to be appointed Kentucky's Poet Laureate and welcome the job of promoting literature for the next 2 years throughout a state that has such a rich literary heritage and a dynamic literary voice. Many of its voices are present in this room today, those formerly honored as Poets Laureate, the Al Smith Fellows, and the many, many writers, readers, teachers, editors, and publishers sitting in the audience today. It is a pleasure to speak for what we do. I'd like to talk for a few minutes on my writer's debt to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I speak as a poet, but represent the many literary genres. I believe that what is abstract, spiritual, or mythic about a poem begins in imagery anchored in place. For me, that place is Kentucky. Even as a girl, years before I began writing poetry seriously, the natural beauty of Kentucky, its farms and mountains, its cities, its history, its stories, and its arts, suggested what would become the metaphors for the recurring themes in my writing. That beauty is immutable, that mortality requires us to be awake and vigilant, that imagination and lack of it are siblings, that the human spirit is not to be underestimated, that art, taking a good, hard look at the way things are, can tip the scales in the direction of the good, toward truth and hope and compassion, and that it ought to. I learned these unverbalized lessons visiting Wolfe County with my father, a UK professor who took dental students summers into Appalachia to provide care for children there, and in visits to Flat Lick, Kentucky, in Knox County, my husband's roots, where I experienced firsthand the lifelong habits of hard-working farmers and the mining of the surrounding mountains. I studied poetry at Jesse Clark Junior High School in Lexington with a teacher who inspired me to follow in her footsteps. In high school, I gained understanding of Kentucky's dark night, reading Harry Caudle, and realized, reading Thomas Merton, the state's profound potential to nurture the human spirit. But it wasn't until graduate school at the University of Louisville, studying creative writing with Dr. Sena Jeter Naslund, that I began to write what were to become my own poems. And where did I turn for my subject matter? First, to a bevy of astonishing 19th century Kentucky-made quilts gathered by a group of industrious women for the 1981 Kentucky Quilt Project. The poem Shining the Eyes in my first book in a yellow room juxtaposes a description of a 19th century wedding quilt with the legend of Daniel Boone trapping like a deer in firelight his wife Rebecca, with my own wedding trip down the western Kentucky Parkway toward the land between the lakes. The poems in this book, written in the 70s and early 80s, depict images of tobacco drying in barns on the outskirts of Lexington. A young man intercepting an impossible pass during a Western Kentucky University football game. The Green River, the Ohio River, cold winter afternoons sledding down snowy hills in Louisville's Cherokee Park. Next, for our Brothers' War, I spent hours at the Filson Club in Louisville and the Kentucky Museum in Bowling Green, immersed in the stories of two Kentucky women who recorded their lives in diaries during the Civil War. Martha Buford Jones of Versailles kept a record of the minutiae of her daily life as a mother of 5 children and the wife of a landowning Confederate horseman. In 11 short persona poems, I attempted to distill the essence of this Woodford County woman's story. And in another 13, the younger Warren County woman's, to preserve the resilience I felt, much the same resilience I'd seen in Rebecca Boone, in the stories of these ordinary, extraordinary Kentucky women. In a sense of time left, the images of Kentucky serve as the backbone of my personal narratives, navigating childhood, marriage, motherhood, my chosen profession, teaching. Often, because they are such a part of my identity, the images of Kentucky oaks and tiger lilies and cardinals work in these poems as metaphors for my faith in nature and recognition of its transience. The oldest poem in the collection imagines a man, a child, and an English setter traversing the very real cornfield I could see from the upstairs bedroom window of a house I lived in Bowling Green. The imagined characters, however, became flesh and blood, and they show up again and again in this collection's poems. The husband tending the daylilies he grows in our Louisville backyard, or driving home down I-64 after a game of golf in September of the year 2001. The child exploring the pond in the woods behind our house, his venturing further one day along Floyd's Fork, where he discovers the headstones, barely decipherable, of an abandoned Kentucky family graveyard. The melancholy teacher takes the reader inside the world of a public high school teacher, chronicling her lifetime, negotiating a large metropolitan school district to teach the literature I have loved since the 7th grade. This book, with one foot firmly planted in Kentucky, which is home, has an international scope. It looks at human-made violence, at terrorism, at war, at racism, at anger and indifference, and at devastating natural disasters with its eyes open. It calls for all of us to be conscious of the beauty of the here and now, to preserve rather than destroy. It suggests why poetry matters in a world with very little emphasis on taking time to ponder how to best live, how to make meaningful our lives. I am indebted to the state of Kentucky that gave me my imagery and a rich literary tradition with high expectations. If you haven't, I encourage everyone here to mine the wealth of what Kentucky writers, including the important writers here today, have produced. I'm also grateful for the many Kentuckians who have encouraged me over the years through good teaching and with constant friendship. I mention specifically the late John Moorman of Soulgrave Press and Gray Zeitz of Larkspur Press. There simply aren't enough words for him. I congratulate the Al Smith Fellows and the winners of the high school Poetry Out Loud competition. And I thank you for honoring me today. I'm happy to go out and spread the word. Thank you.